chronic inflammation, this sort of low grade subclinical inflammation, can be the reason why, for many, even though they might be practicing eat less, move more, calories in, they're watching their calories versus their calories out, might like the weight might not be shifting for them. So can you outline for us what are some of the reasons why we might, or some of the ways in which we might be experiencing this subclinical, what I call chronic low grade inflammation?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of things that can cause that type of inflammation. Some things are very obvious, like, inadequate recovery from an exercise session because you're just beating yourself up with weight training, or say like a CrossFit workout or a high intensity interval training session every single day without properly recovering. That's why I'm a huge fan of using some kind of a wearable, like a ring or a wristband, or something that will track what's called heart rate variability, which is essentially a really, really gold standard way to measure whether you are recovered. And even if you can't go out and say get a blood test every day for a good inflammatory metric like HSCRP or fibrinogen or homocysteine or cytokines, there's all these blood measurements you can get for inflammation, which is smart to do, on maybe like a quarterly basis to see how you're doing as far as your internal biology goes. You're not going to go out and get a blood test every day, but the cool thing is that by tracking your HRV and ensuring that it stays relatively high on a consistent basis, you kind of have a corollary to how recovered you are and how high your inflammation possibly is. Just because HRV, it's a really good metric for things like inflammation, stress, readiness to train, recovery, etc. So just over exercising would be one thing. A lot of healthy people, that'd be one reason for inflammation. As a matter of fact, if you go in for like a blood test for inflammatory markers and you have exercised hard in the 1 or 2 days prior, many physicians, if they don't know that you've exercised hard, they'll actually think you're like at high risk for a heart attack or have rampant inflammation, when in fact all you've done is just done a hard exercise session, which isn't bad, but it can be if that's just like
Well,
happening
it's
on a daily
transiently
basis.
inflammatory. Like it's transiently inflammatory to the body. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
good, like, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, temporarily, unless it's overdone,
yeah, yeah.
and that's just with some people. And you mentioned glycemic variability, and those frequent fluctuations in blood sugar can not only be detrimental to some of those fat burning mechanisms that we talked about if you are attempting to increase your fat burning efficiency, simply because your body's going to burn sugar as a preferential fuel source if you're constantly, say, like, snacking 6 to 10 times a day, which shockingly some nutritionists and personal trainers will still tell people to do to keep their metabolism elevated and their energy levels topped off, when in fact all that does is just send your blood sugar levels on a roller coaster ride all day long and kind of keeps you from tapping into fats as a fuel. But the other thing is that constant surge in blood glucose can also be inflammatory from a vascular standpoint. And so being cognizant of the amount of time during the day that you're eating and how frequent your snacking is, and trying to focus on eating, just like, honestly, I eat 2 or 3 times a day, and in between it's just water, gum, teas, coffees, things like that are relatively acaloric. That's a really good way not only to maintain normalized glycemic variability, but also to keep your inflammation levels at bay.